The Royal Hungarian Express is owned and run by MAB Nostalgia Limited of Hungary. This is the parlour car of the train. Inside this 1900 car are beautifully upholstered seats which are very comfortable and much sought after by passengers. Inside the parlour car, it is a delight. It even has its own piano on the left, which is ideal for occasions like this. The restaurant car has a charm of its own and is perfect for wining, dining and relaxing. Soon after arriving in Budapest, we set off for our first trip. The train is to be pulled by a vintage steam loco built in Budapest in 1900 and is still going strong. A special candlelit dinner awaits us, an ideal way to get to know one's fellow passengers and a good start to the adventures that lie ahead. So having had an introduction the previous evening to the Royal Hungarian Express, we rejoined the train at Budapest Station the following morning. Our engine, number 424247, proudly carrying the train's name, stands ready and is all set to go. And soon we're on our way. It's not long before we come to our first stop for a photo run past, which gives us a great view of the big 480 locomotive. The next run past is at a station, with the engine throwing out a lot of black smoke, which unfortunately is coming towards us as we are standing on the station bridge. Needless to say, we all got covered in black smoke. Whilst at the station, a mixed freight comes through with many wagons. And then we travel on again, rolling happily through some pleasant countryside to arrive at our next photo run past. We've got out while the train runs into the station, looking rather impressive against a nice clear sky, with yet again a lot more smoke, and then goes back and comes along again for all our benefits. With the train stationary, it gives us a very good view of the locomotive, especially the business end. On the station, a small boy studies the engine while the lady station official looks on, and the driver looks to where we're to go next. The train, having backed up, is then set for another run through past the station with, once again, plenty of smoke. An important part of any journey is food, and it's soon into the restaurant car for our first lunch of the trip. Refreshed and fortified, we arrive at a steam show held near Bratislava. This was a totally unexpected treat and was a great way to spend the afternoon. There were some marvellous locomotives on view, and with the beautiful weather which had brought many people to this establishment, it really was most enjoyable. One beautiful blue engine here being given a polish was to pull us on a very exciting run in the morning. There were engines from every vintage and even a steam rail car on view. And with music and fun going on, lots of children, it was a real party atmosphere. Many of the engines were in steam, and it was a great credit to the organisers for having such an informal day with everyone just strolling around enjoying themselves. There were some interesting diesel trains on view, as well as something we do not see in England, and that is a snowplow built onto the front of an engine, a huge rotary type. Some very old engines were on view, and some very young ladies on view in the most gorgeous costumes of years gone by. They really did add a tremendous amount of colour and style to the proceedings here. The rail car was operating and had steam up, and was giving rides to some absolutely delighted young children, all there with their mums and dads. It was great to see this little thing going up and down. And then there was another magnificent locomotive called Green Anton. I can understand the green bit, but I never found out what the Anton bit meant. This was another 480 loco, really looking very impressive. But these ladies in their dresses, and indeed gentlemen and children, were a real picture. Almost longing for days of years gone by. But things have to move on, and with a last lingering look at this lovely we go back to the business of the day, and that is looking at railway engines. Here's another large loco from the last days of steam. Which was sedately moving up and down a short stretch of line, past the usual stalls selling postcards, pictures, books and other memorabilia. And then there was the smaller ones, just gently chuntering up and down. A steam crane was also on view, its jib towering up into the sky, whilst its grab lay quiet and peaceful on the ground nearby. Another interesting item was a car fitted with train wheels, which was running up and down the rails, together with another one, causing a lot of interest and giving rides to excited children. Whilst at the another part of the show stood a wartime reminder, a camouflaged armoured gun wagon, together with its little engine. But a steam show wouldn't be the same without a turntable with an engine on it. And here is the engine that pulled us all the way from Budapest being turned. And in a cloud of steam, the engine moves majestically away to find itself another parking space somewhere in the show. One of the loveliest engines on show was this Austrian Express locomotive, complete with driver, that was built in Vienna in 1911. It just looks a thoroughbred with those big wheels, a joy to look at. The following morning we're on Bratislava Station, just in time to see one of these steam-hauled specials leaving the station. This is one of the two trains that will be racing each other along a dual set of railway lines, and should prove to be a very exciting morning. As the train moves on, we go to meet our train on another platform, and in a very short time the lovely blue engine we saw yesterday is hauling the train out of the station and ready to catch the one up in front. It's not long before we're told that the train has caught up the one in front, and everybody dashes out of the compartment in order to get a good view of the window. Although it's comfortable, it's very empty at the moment. And there's the end of the train as we gradually overtake it. This is going to be rather fun for the next few miles, as firstly the train in front slows so that we can overtake. Everybody is at the window taking photographs, waving, even the staff of the train. This is proving to be tremendous fun. And the huge engine comes into view, even the driver's taking film. The engine's just coasting at the moment because we've overtaken it, but in a few minutes he'll be putting his foot down. And here it comes. The driver's opened up the regulator and she's beginning to accelerate. What a wonderful sight. At this point our train is slowing down so the other one can overtake it. Many people are taking pictures and thoroughly enjoying themselves on this really interesting day. As we raced through a station, the two trains must have created quite a sight as we rushed through. And then it was overtaking the train again. This just kept on repeating itself. Fantastic. At this point the two trains are running side by side, and it's been a tradition for many years that if you can, you shake hands with those in the opposite carriage. Eventually all the things had to come to an end, and it was time for our next photo stop at the station. We disembarked whilst the trains did a run past for us. Then the two engines did some manoeuvring around in order to form a double header train that was going to go off to Prague. After all the excitement of the morning, it was nice to settle back into our carriage and reflect on what had been an absolutely wonderful morning. Where else in the world can you do that sort of thing? And so we journeyed on through some very pleasant countryside, and of course time for some lunch, after which we settled down to some very pleasant running. It wasn't long before we reached our next photo stop or run past, where we double-headed up at Green Anton. As I was standing looking at these two marvellous engines going by, as they raced away, I began to think perhaps we ought to have been on it. But then thankfully the regulator was closed and the brakes came on, and all was well with the world again. It was not too long after this that we arrived at our next stop, the delightful town of Trencin. The early morning sunshine of the following day showed off to very good effect the impressive facade of the Hotel Tatra where we had stayed that night. Because of an early start this morning, regretfully there was little time for sightseeing, but the opportunity was taken to look at some of the buildings in the vicinity. This particular one looked very good silhouetted against the sky, whilst a nearby church and quite a pleasant tree-lined street looked equally attractive. But towering over everything at Trencin was the magnificent castle, high up on the rock overlooking the town. This really was an impressive building dating back hundreds of years, and in this glorious sunshine looked wonderful. Even from the station it looked very, very imposing, where our train with Green Anton in charge awaited us. After some great running, it was soon time for another photo run past, and a spot where a crane had made its nest, with some chicks in the nest as well, which proved to be very interesting. And then Green Anton appeared, quietly working up speed, as an American man persisted in talking. Back on board again, we travelled onwards past what was one of the most attractive parts of the whole journey. Beautiful lake in a lovely setting. It wasn't long before we had to say goodbye to Green Anton and link up with an electrical locomotive that was standing by. This was quite an interesting locomotive and had been specially prepared for the journey. After passing through some pleasant country and into Poland, it was time to change engines yet again. And this time it was going to have to be one that was going to run tender first. As usual on these occasions, everybody gets out and has a good look at the engine, the wheels, gets their cameras working, and generally stroll around. This is one of the many 210 locos that can be found all over Eastern European countries and can be put to service on both goods and passenger trains. Once again we're away and began travelling through some built-up areas where very little interest seemed to be shown in the passing of our wonderful steam train. One or two cars waiting for a crossing. Hardly anybody in their gardens looking at us or on the road, just a few. And so we journeyed forth in rather dull weather on to our next destination. It was at this point that I spied another train coming in the opposite direction, decided to film it, which turned out to be the longest coal train I have ever seen in my life. It went on and on and on. By now we were approaching one of the main highlights of the trip, but first we had to stop to let the engine be turned round, and then made the short distance into the station at Krakow. So we're not stopping here. We said a temporary goodbye to our train here because tomorrow was set aside for sightseeing. The day started with a vintage tram ride around the city, but it was very wet and very grey. But despite the weather, the old tram kept going, clattering along around the city. After the tram ride, we made our way to the city centre in the rain, and there we were given an interesting description by our very good speaking young lady guide.
Different goods, meat, cattle, geese, sausages, hams, but also amber, salt or iron or copper, all these precious materials. It was the last day was the presentation of the king in the town, so there was a huge stage built here, and lots of guilds used to greet the new king, of course, in the main market square.
The delightful horse-drawn carriages that are so much a feature of Krakow are rather redundant today. The horse is looking very bedraggled and the driver's looking totally fed up.
The level of the city went up. If you go to any synagogue, any church in Krakow, you have to take some steps down to reach original level of
This is St. Florian's Gate, once an important gateway into the city in medieval days, but now very well preserved and capable of standing for many, many more years to come. The Pope John Paul was from Poland and used to stay at this house and give his blessing to the thousands who were assembled in the street below him. Let's pretend he could bring some sunshine to the day and see Krakow at its best. The Cloth Hall was first built in 1358 and surrounds one side of the market square, was built even earlier in 1260. It is the largest in Europe. In the background is the tower for the former town hall. Across the square can be seen the Gothic church of St. Mary's, and in front you can see the horses and carriages doing what they like best in lovely weather, transporting sightseers around the city. This church, which is 14th century, is amongst the finest historical buildings in Krakow. On another side of the square are some of the historic houses and mansions which date right back from the 16th and 17th century. This is the magnificent tower of the former town hall of Krakow and is one of the city's most historic buildings. In another part of the city is Krakow's theatre and opera house with its magnificent facade. Another important building in Krakow is Wawel Cathedral with its curious domes, which are the roofs of chapels. Inside of the nave is very impressive, with the shrine of Saint Stanislaus dominating the centre. The magnificent silver coffin of the saint was made in 1670. Sections of the medieval city wall still remain, complete with towers. This particular section is an ideal place for displaying paintings, especially in the summer months. The interior of St. Mary's Church is equally grand. The nave and high altar is very impressive. Standing high on a hill overlooking Krakow is the Royal Castle, which has stood here for centuries, keeping guard over the city. It is a great attraction, and many thousands visit the castle every year. Inside, the magnificent ceilings and splendour of paintings and tapestries on the walls are quite breathtaking. And outside is a very attractive courtyard. As our visit to Krakow comes to a close, we return to St. Mary's Church again, and bear in mind the long, narrow windows at the top of the tower on the left-hand side. In the Middle Ages, it was a watchtower. Now a bugle is sounded every hour, and on the hour to the four corners of the world. Back on our rainy day in Krakow, we're standing in front of St. Mary's at midday and keep a close eye on that top window. That is where the bugler or trumpeter will stand There it is, the window's open, and you can just see the front of the bugle. We were told there is a saying that if you haven't heard the bugle, you haven't been to Krakow. The next day we rejoined the Royal Hungarian Express, and once everybody was on board and the crew got the all clear, we were treated to a false start. As you can see, they really do like black smoke in this part of the world. Once we'd settled back on board, we were in for a period of free running. If you're at the back of the train, it's always very nice to see where you've been. A little to the south of Krakow, we came to our next stop, the Railway Museum at Chabowa. Chabowa was once a thriving steam locomotive depot, but with the demise of steam it was used to store redundant locomotives. With interest in vintage railways growing, Poland decided to restore some locomotives and rolling stock, and Chabowa was chosen as an ideal location for this, and the Railway Museum was officially opened in 1993. There is a wide range of locomotives on view, including this armoured train, a relic from wartime days, complete with a rather interesting tank engine. but most of the locos stand idle, exposed to the weather. Some are missing a few components, no doubt used to keep others in running order. This 262 loco was built in 1951, whilst this 280 loco was built in Vienna and is of 1921 vintage. Here a 1934 built 210-2 tank locomotive stands silent in retirement. One very important aspect of the day was of course lunch, and an enjoyable buffet lunch was served out in the open. Some of the locos are in steam, and this is one of the many 210-0 German locomotives. This one, with its mournful air pump clanking away, was built in 1944. And so our visit to the museum draws to a close, and with the man in charge of this engine giving us the thumbs up, we set off once again. It's time for another stop, and we get out and stretch our legs whilst the engines are watered and serviced. Man in charge looking on to make sure everything is done properly. And see the water pouring in the tender there. Our lovely coach. And if we look back a bit and look through the window, we can see the tour manager grabbing a few 40 winks. Whilst we wait, a local passenger train comes in. Most of the trains are electrically driven with overhead wiring. Still in dull and gloomy weather, we set off for our next destination, which was Zacapa, where our accommodation was the rather grand hotel. Today we were going to travel on a different kind of railway, a funicular railway, to the top of the hills that overlook the town. The modern car, with its excellent all-round visibility, took us quietly and smoothly to the top. The views from up here are breathtaking, as on a perfect morning we drank in the scenery. Later, after a leisurely drink of a different nature, it was time to make our descent. So after one last look at the view, we boarded our train again.
This side is much more dramatic.
Keep our fingers crossed.
With the station at the bottom of the hill looming ever closer, it was time to leave this delightful funicular railway and its lovely views. It had been a very pleasant, relaxing morning. We were blessed with more fine weather the next day, and on a beautiful morning, aboard the Royal Hungarian Express once again, we set off, travelling through some very picturesque countryside. As the morning rolled by, it was soon time for the all-important lunch. But there was no time to relax as another photo stop was coming up, and it was everybody out onto the tracks, get into position for a good shot. Travelling with RTC is not for the faint-hearted.
Close the door. Okay.
After countless pictures, it was back on board again. Travelling at the back of the train and with an engine on the back of the train, it was rather interesting, especially to look out of the window and to see the shadow of our engine and the smoke on the ground. We were so fortunate in having good weather because today we had a number of photo stops. were now approaching the Tatra region of the country, where we were about to board a special charter vintage electric train at Poprad Tatry Station. This narrow-gauge electric railway was built in 1908, and the train dates from 1913. The line takes us to the foothills of the Tatra Mountains to Starismakovac. On arrival at the station, we disembark and get a very good view of the little electric train, and also of the very attractive station here, with the little train standing against a modern version. Our hotel was built for the winter sports held in this region, and in the lovely early morning sunshine we got a good view of the surrounding Tatra Mountains. Soon it was time to return to the station and board a train to take us back. This time it's a modern train, and the station mistress sees us off. We disembark at Poprad Tatry Station and, looking back, get a wonderful panoramic view of the Tatra Mountains. At another part of the station, our magnificent engine and the Royal Hungarian Express awaits us. This station, however, has a sinister history. And then we're off, racing through the countryside, giving us some really enjoyable running. On through stations, and some very enjoyable wooded countryside. At one stage, a helicopter kept station with us, no doubt doing some filming work. Then it was time again to take up our positions for some run pasts. The next one involved a little bit of mountaineering expertise. And with no damage to life or limb, we enjoyed a view of our wonderful engine and the Royal Hungarian Express crossing a very impressive bridge. On our way once again, the engine and train making a magnificent sight as it speeds round a long curving left-hand bend. But soon we were going to make a rather interesting stop. Our engine on a bridge immediately above a narrow gauge railway with its engine underneath. This was the little railway that ran to Czerny Balog, and we were going to take a trip on the train. There's nothing like having pretty girls serving you drinks on a train, is there? Just like mainline trains, of course, we had to have our photo stop. Oh, give it some worry. Despite the rather dull and gloomy weather, it had been quite fun, and soon we arrive at the station terminus of Czerny Balog. There's not a great deal to do here, and about the only interesting thing is watching this engine move slowly back to get onto the end of the train. However, another engine is on the opposite end of the train, and soon we're off, with the engine going backwards. Fortunately, the sun has come out again, making the return journey quite pleasant. About halfway from home, we stopped and we all had a very enjoyable chicken barbecue. This was quite pleasant, very welcome, washed down with a glass or two of beer. Having been well fed and watered, we set off for the final stretch home. Rejoining the Royal Hungarian Express, we set off again for some more pleasant running in really lovely countryside. In lovely weather, we were about to enjoy some great run-pasts. After enjoying some terrific run-pasts with wonderful photographic opportunities, we settled back for the short run behind this engine, which had served us so well, because we were getting to a point where we were going to change over to a Hungarian engine and say goodbye to the big Czech engine. And then Robin, one of the tour managers, called us together for the group photo. This was definitely one for the album. The big engine then moved sedately off, travelling a little way down the line until it came to a set of points when it would come back and park itself nearby. As the big engine reverses and slows, we get our first glimpse of the old Hungarian engine that is going to take us on the last leg into Budapest. This is a former Austrian-Hungarian engine built in 1917. A very elegant passenger locomotive. After changing tracks, the engine reverses back to join up to the Royal Hungarian Express. Once again, we will be a complete train. We also say farewell to the support train that's been following us around various countries. And once again we're off, this time through a fairly built-up area, on our way to Budapest. But before we arrived, we were to be involved in 3 very enjoyable activities. The first one was, regretfully, our very last run past. In the late evening sunshine, the engine looked absolutely superb. The next was settling in for our last dinner on board this train.
I hope you can. I'm quite sorry.
And with piano accompaniment. The food and the wine and the service had been exceptional, and we were grateful to the engine crews and indeed the train crews and chefs for making it so enjoyable. And last but not least, the 2 train managers who'd worked so hard to make it all work. And then a presentation was made to Robin, one of the tour managers. She had worked very hard during the trip, looking after suitcases and all the various needs of everybody. And I think the look on her face tells us there's one very happy young lady. We began our last day of the trip at the Hungarian Railway Museum, just outside Budapest. The main building is shaped like a horseshoe, with engine sheds and tracks all leading out to a turntable from the inside of its crescent-shaped design. Locomotives from the earliest days of steam stand silent in their retirement. Later and more advanced locos form an impressive display of former motive power from the great age of steam. The museum has been thoughtfully designed with pleasant garden areas and pathways which create a restful and relaxing atmosphere, a far cry from when it was a very important depot in the days of steam. There is also a varied collection of vintage carriages, including a complete train from the early 1900s. This is known as the Centennial Train and is in regular use for charter parties. There is also a beautifully restored horse-drawn carriage. The turntable was a vital part of the complex, enabling locos to be moved on the right lines, but it does look better with a locomotive on it. This is similar to one of the massive locomotives that had pulled our train during the trip. This marvellous old loco dates from the early 1900s, whilst next door to it an interesting streamlined Class 242 tank engine, built in 1938 for passenger duties. A very impressive American-style diesel-electric loco, which was very popular. And if it all becomes too much, a little sit-down is in order. From the outside of the roundhouse, as it is known, it appears all is quiet and peaceful. But inside the roundhouse, which is the biggest of its kind in Central Europe, it is far from quiet and peaceful. Locomotives, both steam and diesel, are serviced, repaired, and overhauled regularly to keep them all in running order. This loco is typical of the style and design of European, used for express passenger services. Inside the main part of the roundhouse is the Orient Hall, where the pride of the MAG Nostalgia fleet of carriages resides. This is an original 1912 dining car from the famous Orient Express train. Fully restored in 1987 and seating up to 36 people, it is in regular use for private charter groups who wish to wine and dine and savour the delights of a bygone age. The interior gives one an idea of what it must have been like to dine amongst this beautiful wooden veneer, lighting, leather seats, and all the trappings of that age, when the rich and famous travelled across Europe. The spacious Orient Hall is put to many good uses. With an impressive backdrop, the hall hosts gala evening dinners, seating up to 1,200 people, or receptions and musical events for up to 2,500 people. We take a last look at the magnificent locomotives standing outside and savour the delights of the grounds and gardens, where a refreshing cool drink was taken before we made our way to our last stop. This is the view of Budapest that most people are familiar with. The city straddles a gentle curve of the River Danube, and today, standing on Castle Hill and in perfect weather, the capital city of Hungary, with its reputation of being Paris of Eastern Europe, is seen at its best. Traffic flows over its famous bridge, which connects the former Buda and Pest. Many rivercraft convey visitors to view the sights, just as in Paris.
The city center, and the two main buildings are connecting here on the left-hand side.
In the glorious sunshine, the blue Danube is living up to its name, given to it by Johann Strauss, the famous waltz king. The Danube makes its way past the city, flowing gently around Margaret Island. Castle Hill is where many of Budapest's most important buildings and museums are located. This building, according to our guide, is known as the White House, because Budapest wanted to have one and be the same as Washington, USA. Another attractive building has adjacent to it an interesting mural on a long wall depicting a military event that took place around 1760. This building is preserved as a symbol of more recent history. Bullet holes are a grim reminder of the fighting during the Nazi occupation of World War II. This is Heroes Square, with its impressive millenary monument, backed by colonnades where heroes of the city's tempestuous past are commemorated. Beneath the column is the tomb of an unknown soldier from the 1956 uprising. At the top of the 120-foot column, the angel Gabriel stands offering the Hungarian crown to King Stephen. Many impressive buildings surround Heroes Square, including the city park, and makes a perfect location for sightseeing. Looking in the opposite direction from Castle Hill, we see another view of the city, with its many trees lining the banks of the Danube. Statues abound celebrating great men of the city's past. This is a certain Gorgi Artur. Lived to a great age, didn't he? We took a last look at the magical view of Budapest and the Danube before flying home. It had been a very enjoyable trip, with great locations, lovely scenery, good food, good wine, good company, wonderful steam engines, and of course the memorable Royal Hungarian Express.